Okay, so let's see an actual demonstration of how to mix. Mixing is really a very subjective thing, so there's really no one way to mix, but there are enough kind of standard practices that we can demonstrate here to just help in your mixing. I've gone ahead and taken a live performance and recorded it flat with no EQ, no dynamics, no effects, so you can see me build a mix completely from scratch. The reason I'm not going to do that with a live band is that the sound of the live band coming from the front of house speakers, you won't be able to hear me over that, and then also the sound from the speakers will bleed into my microphone and so on. We'll also have the benefit doing this with a recorded performance to solo each channel and also even loop certain sections to gain some perspective on how to mix. But know this, each of these sources, they're completely raw, no processing whatsoever, so we can really start from an absolute scratch. So let's start out with our drums, and we start out with our kick drum. Obviously you can hear that there's some other instruments coming through that. It's not a magic microphone. We've got to fix it up with a gate here in a little while. Then we have our side stick, which turns into a snare in just a couple of measures. It switches from side stick to a full snare. Then we have our hat, and then 4 toms, and then a ride, and then our overheads. So the first thing I do with all of this is start working out where I'm going to be panning things. So kick drum is going to be straight down the middle. Traditionally it's always straight down the middle, but also because there's a lot of low frequencies, you want to share that load across your drivers. Then we have our snare drum here. The hi-hat here, if I select that, I can pan that out to the right. Actually switched over to the ride here, and I'll come back to the hi-hat here in a second. I've just got this looping around. So if this is in a recording setup, I'd probably pan it out a little wide, but in a live situation, you don't want to rip off some of the people who are sitting over on the left-hand side. So I'm normally just a little bit more conservative with my panning here. In my toms, I would be less conservative. I would bring, say, the tom 1 there, tom 2 to about 2 o'clock, tom 3 a little bit wider, and then tom 4 a little bit further out. So you can see that these are the 4 toms here, from left to right as they go across. The ride, I might, maybe put that out and maybe just to give a little bit of flavour when it switches between the hi-hat and the ride. And then in terms of the overheads, I would bring them out hard left and hard right. So let's just bring all of these up. And again, we'll clean these up with gates in a little while. Okay, that's a pretty good mix that we can deal with. Now, depending on whatever mixer you have, you might be able to have DCA groups. Bring some of those down there. It'll be different on what particular mixer you have. In this particular mixer, all we need to do is hit the DCA here and select that, and then we'll select all of our drums. And now we can control that entire subgroup or that DCA group by one fader. This becomes a really great way just to be able to blend if you just want to pump your drums in the chorus and bring them down in the verse and things like that. You can do that through DCAs, you can do that through subgroups if you like. The benefit of going through DCAs is that it's kind of a remote control of all of these faders. It's just like pulling these down with the same relative mix between them. So instead of grabbing all of these and doing that, you can just assign them all to one DCA and you can ride the drums there. Now, this being a DCA, which is a remote control of that, you only need to use one. If you were using subgroups, you'd need to, as we saw a little while ago in the analog mixer, if you are using subgroups and you want to preserve all this this panning that we did, then you'd need to use a pair of subgroups. So if you have DCAs, use them. They're a lot better way. It's just a one fader allows you to write all of that. Of course, you can do that with background vocals. You could write all your keys or your guitars and all that kind of stuff. Okay, let's move on to our guitars. We'll start off with our bass guitar here. I think I have a clean guitar here. All these will be straight up the middle. Actually, these two could kind of play off each other. So maybe this guy goes out the left a little bit. This guy goes a little bit out of the right. Now this one here is a stereo guitar. And so we do want to bend that. That's right. That's that grunge right there. So then what's this one? Okay, this has a kind of a guitar riff. We're going to add some echoes to this guitar riff in a moment. Let's move on to our second layer, which is a guitar lead. I don't think that's in this part of the song, so we'll come back to that. Here's our acoustic. Again, we'll probably keep them up the middle in terms of panning. So let's see how that all sounds with our drums. Cool, so let's move over to our keyboards. Okay, we have our piano here, which is a stereo piano. We definitely want to pan that out left and to the right. And a synth pad. Another reason for using DCAs, if you're not on that particular layer, it's just a nice way to bring up things without having to switch layers all the time. Okay, now we have some vocals. In us, let your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Okay, so we've basically got a basic mix. Let's now go through just input by input and start EQing and adding dynamics. So here's our kick drum, and if we go over to viewing this, there's a really neat thing on the M32, and some of your mixes might have this, where you'll actually have a spectral viewer to see all of the frequency energy across the frequency spectrum. Obviously, being a kick drum, you have a lot of low frequencies that have energy and a little bit of harmonics up here and the smack of the beater and whatever. So, first thing I tend to do when I EQ a kick drum is to go after the fundamental, and just from memory, the fundamental of a kick drum is around 60 to 80 hertz. You can see that reflected right here. So I'll go into the low here and I'll bump that up. Now I'll move that frequency down to where I see that frequency, which is around 60 hertz. And obviously if you bump that up too much, you're probably going to overload and it'll just get a little, way too muddy. But just a little bit of that fundamental would really help us out. The next frequency I'll go for is what I call the boxiness. And like most EQing, you tend to use a fishing technique, where what you do is you boost that way up, narrow it down, and then go after the frequency that kind of sounds obnoxious. And so right about there, around 200 hertz, it's just a little kind of boxy there. And what I can do is just widen that out a little bit, and then just take out, not a lot, maybe a couple of dB right there. And then the next one I would go after is the smack of that beater. And the great thing about emphasizing the smack of a beater is that you can, and it's normally around 2K, is that you can really emphasize and make that kick drum stand out of the mix without having to bump it, way up here. If you just need it to just just the attack of that comes through the mix, normally around 2K is a good one here. So let's have a listen to that without EQ, and then with EQ. Okay, moving on to our snare drum. What's one thing that you notice with the snare drum immediately? Not a lot of low energy there. So we could either use that with the EQ here, or we could use our low cut or a high pass filter here, and then you can move that along. If you move it up too much, the snare drum will start getting thin. We don't want that. We want to bring it down about here. And the first thing I want to do is just bring up some of that kind of the tubbiness of that snare, or the body of that snare, and that's normally around 200 hertz. So I'll go low frequency here and bump that up. You can see I'm missing it, so I'll just move it along there. And then now I'll go after some of the boxes of that snare drum. We'll do the same thing here, move it along. Let me wait till it goes from the side stick to the snare. Yeah, it's probably right about there. If I just pull out just a little bit of that and then add a little bit of top end kind of sizzle. So now let's listen to that before and after. That's without EQ. Add just a little bit more top end to that and widen that up a bit. Okay, so here's our hi-hat. What's the first thing you would note about hi-hat? Look at all the energy up there. There's not a lot going down there, so we would definitely want to employ our low cut, and we can be pretty severe here, going all the way up, if you like. There's a little bit of energy down here, but I tend to kind of pull that out a little bit. Around 600 hertz, there's kind of like the clank of that. I'd kind of pull it out a little bit there, and then go after maybe around 3K, and then maybe even a little bit higher. So let's listen to that without, and now with. Much better. Okay, so here's our high tom. I've got this looped around so we can hear that. If you're in a sound check, just have your drummer just do single hits on that. So first thing I do, look at the high cut. Not too much, right? Boy, it helps to have this visually up here. Okay, so the first thing I do is probably add a little bit of low energy there, like right around that fundamental. Pull out a little bit of boxiness around maybe 300. Add a little bit of bite off of that stick noise. Might even add a little bit of top end here if we went to the shelf. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So then, because these toms are fairly similar, you could do some cheats here where we could copy them across to each of them. Let me do that off camera and I'll come back. Now obviously as I go to a lower tom, you want to add some of that low cut, but you wouldn't want to mirror what the high tom was. Remember, the high tom was right there. So on the next one, you'd want to go a little bit lower on that. And then the third one, a little bit lower than that. And the floor tom, you may not even want to do that at all. Or maybe we could sneak in just a little tiny bit there. And then you might want to adjust your fundamentals and also your cutting of your boxiness as you go across. But for the moment, I'm pretty happy with this. Okay, let's look at our ride. So first thing, obviously, low cut. We could bring that up pretty high. And then I wouldn't do a lot in terms of EQ. Maybe if I went over high into a high shelf, I could just add a little bit of sizzle there around 10K or even a little bit, maybe a little lower. Then moving over to our overhead, first thing we'd want to do is definitely low cut that. And again, maybe just add a little bit of sheen up above that. And as long as we're happy with that, we can copy that over to the right. So now we have a rough mix of our kick, snare hat, our 4 toms, and certainly this will come a lot better when we start compressing and also adding some gates, but I'm pretty happy with my drums right now. Okay, so moving on to our bass guitar here. Obviously, a musical instrument does not have a fixed fundamental. As he slides up and down the bass neck, then that's going to be moving around. So you can't really chase a static fundamental. But I would say around 100 hertz is where you would want to go for a fundamental. Low cut, obviously, we don't need any of that. You want to leave that way open down the bottom to get all those low frequencies the first couple of octaves. So let's have a listen here. I would move that down to, yeah, probably around 100, something like that, and bump that up a little bit. I might pull down on this particular bass around 200 hertz. Do you hear how it kind of gets kind of boxy there? I might just scoop just a little bit out of that, and then go after about 2 or 3K just to get a little bit of that finger noise. So that's without it. That's with it. Maybe a little bit more there. Yeah, there you go. That sounds a little nicer. Now when we listen to all of our guitars here, they were all mic'd up well. I don't see any particular problems with any of these guys. If you felt like it, you could definitely go down here and just high pass, you know, a bunch of them. Maybe this chunking guitar here. I'd probably want to stay away from that a little bit because you don't want to lose a lot of that low energy. So let's have a listen to this in context. Okay. We're starting to get a mix together. Let's move on to our piano. Now I'll just do this on the left-hand side and I'll copy it on the right-hand side. But what I'm finding is the left hand on this piano is getting fairly heavy and it's going to muddy up the mix in terms of the bass guitar. So I would tend to, sorry, let me just go back here, and we can drop in a bit of a low cut there. Certainly not that much. The first couple of octaves I normally like to take off on the piano there. And then in terms of EQ, let's take out just a little bit of around 200. Do you hear how it's kind of boxy right there? Take a little bit of that out. Maybe a high shelf. happy with that. Let me copy that over. So now we have our pianos there and our synth. I think the synth should be fine. So let's hear how that's sounding with the various other parts. Starting to sound good. Let's look at our vocals. Okay, so let's have a listen to this vocal. First thing I do is bump this up, narrow it down, and start to go for frequencies I'm not crazy about.
You bring peace,
right about
bring
there.
life, you bring change. Darkness drowns in your light when you reign.
Right about
Bow
there.
down at the sound of your name. No one else wears a crown when you reign.
So listen before and after.
Reign. When you reign, you bring peace, you bring life, you bring change. Darkness drowns in your light when you...
Let me copy that over to the vocal. There's our backing vocal. I forgot to do that with my lead vocal too. Let me go back here.
When you reign, you bring peace, you bring life, you bring change. Darkness drowns in your light when you reign.
Actually,
All bow down at the sound of your name. No one else wears a crown when you reign. When you reign. When you reign, you bring peace, you bring life, you bring change. Darkness drowns in your light when you reign. All bow down at the sound of your name. No one else wears a crown when you reign. When you reign. When you reign, you bring peace, you bring life, you bring change. Darkness drowns.
okay, so the very first thing that you tend to look at in a gate is to just lower the threshold. Obviously, if you lower that way too much, nothing will get through and all of this gain reduction will come up. The trick is you just want to be able to open it up a little bit. A couple of other things you might want to look for is the release. We want to, if you bring that release and the hold, obviously if you do a slow attack, we've lost the punch of that kick drum. If there's a few clicks there, just bring it up a few milliseconds there. And then of course the range is how much are you going to close that gate. Like in this example right here, that's basically opening it and completely closing it, where if you bring it down to a range, then that's just reducing it a certain amount of dB. But if you want just a pure gate, then you could set it up here to say 60. So listen to that without the gate. And with the gate. You may not have this on a lot of gates, but there's a setup where you can set up a key filter. And if I zeroed this in onto where the kind of the smack of that beta is, then I might get a better result. Now, since I've done that, I'll probably need to lower that threshold. Good, that's a really clean gate. Now, in this example, this is not probably what I would do in a live situation, but you can kind of see what's going on. Take that gate off, all the other stuff that's bleeding through, drop the gate in, bang, that cleans it up really well. So here's all of our drums, nicely gated. Nice and tight. We'll add some ambience later on, but I'm pretty happy with our drums. Okay, let's look at our bass guitar here, and I'll turn our compressor on, and we'll lower this, and you'll see we're going to start seeing some gain reduction right here. We have a 3-to-1 ratio, so anything above that is being reduced by a factor of 3. 3 dBs go in, only 1 dB comes out. What I'm trying to look for is about a 6 to 9 dB gain reduction, so probably around there. The next thing I'll look at is the attack. Listen to it right now, it's clamping down very quickly. If you slow that attack, you'll get some more of that finger noise come through. And then I'd probably bring up the gain. Let's hear that in context with our drums. Okay, let's do the same thing with our vocal, lead vocal
you
here.
You bring change, darkness drowns in your light when you reign. I'll bow down at the sound of your name. No one else wears a crown when you reign. When you reign, when you reign,
sit out drums.
You bring peace, you bring life, you bring change. Darkness drowns in your light when you reign. I'll bow down at the sound of your name.
I'm pretty happy with that mix. Let's start adding some effects. I brought up 4 different effects here, and they're brought up underneath these bus ends here. Don't worry about this particular mixer, but basically I've set up a room, a hall, an echo, and a chorus. This is what it sounds like, just on our kick drum here. So here's our room, hall, a delay, and then a chorus. Okay, so typically I just want to add just a little bit of room to that. Depends on how live your room is. Add an echo to that. Put a hole on that.
Bring change, darkness drowns in your light when you rest. When you rest is worship, this is praise, giving you my days. When you rest, you bring peace, you bring life, you bring change. Darkness drowns in your light when you rest. When you rest.
Getting the clipping there so we can start bringing everything down.
Jesus, I long for the day you return to make all things new.
We're drowning a bit of the
I
reverb
look
there.
to the heavens, hoping the sun will come shining through. And we will worship, we will praise and see you face to face. When you reign, you bring peace, you bring life, you bring change. Darkness drowns in your light when you reign. All bow down at the sound of your name. No one else wears a crown when you reign. When you reign. So let your kingdom come, your will be done in me. Let your kingdom come, your will be done in us. Let your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, as it is in heaven. Sing it out. When you reign. Darkness drowns in your light.